A bill proposed in New York State would allow Airbnb users to stay in a unit indefinitely without fear of eviction. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over a topic that I have covered a few times before, and that's the new proposed good cause eviction law up in the state of New York. Now, as I mentioned before, this law, it's a bad deal. It's a bad deal for landlords, and it takes away our property rights, and it's going to also not only prevent a landlord from being able to evict the tenant, it's also going to impose rent control onto basically all landlords across the entire state. So this thing, it's a double whammy. It's a really, really bad proposal, bad legislation. And, you know, the reason I keep bringing it up is because they need to fight right now to make sure that this thing does not pass, okay? If it passes, then small landlords and large landlords alike will just be in a world of hurt. And that's why I'm saying, hey, we got to get the message out there. And, you know, this is even going to the fact where what happens in New York State, because, you know, it is on the cutting edge of this kind of anti-landlord legislation, it starts to spread into other states, okay? So I could be seeing this sort of thing in the Midwest. I've already talked about how, you know, we've got these tenant unions down in Kansas City where I invest, and tenant unions were only a thing at first out, you know, on the coasts, and now they're up in the Midwest as well, trying to fight for more tenant rights, to take more property rights away from landlords. So it wouldn't surprise me one bit if I saw this sort of proposal up in the Midwest in where I invest, okay? So even us, we're not protected. That's why we have to fight it now before it starts spreading and it goes too far. Now, before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know what you think, okay? Now, as I mentioned before, an Airbnb user under this proposal could stay in this unit. You wouldn't be able to get rid of them. You wouldn't be able to get them out of your property if they didn't want to leave, okay? So can you imagine? I mean, what do you think of that? What do you think of the fact that, hey, this proposal is so broad that it would even, you know, allow Airbnb users to completely screw landlords over? I mean, I think this is insane. Okay, this is an absolutely insane proposal, and the only people who think this is a good idea are people who don't understand economics, don't understand business, don't understand landlords, and you know, are trying to pass these socialist policies so that we can live in some sort of utopia. But the only thing it's really going to result in is costs are going to increase for tenants, okay? It's going to make affordable housing so hard to find that the few properties that aren't covered by this are going to skyrocket in cost, okay? Landlords aren't going to want to invest in their properties anymore because they can't get rid of these bad tenants. They can't get the rent increases they need in order to make enough money so that they can actually improve their properties. So, I mean, properties are going to start falling into disrepair, okay? And worst of all, it creates this reliance of these tenants on the government or on, you know, government regulation in order to actually survive. And I think people should be able to take care of themselves. I don't think that we should be reliant upon the government to create this false system of, you know, government price controls in order for us to live, because we've seen what government price controls do. They create a shortage of supply, and then with that shortage of supply, we see prices skyrocket, okay? And this is going to be an awful thing for New York State, and I don't want to see this spread anywhere, okay? But anyway, this article is actually coming from the New York Post, and it says, Albany's no eviction ever bill will devastate landlords and New York's housing stock. And it's an opinion article, right? And I like how they call it the no eviction ever bill, okay? Because basically it's taking away landlords' rights to evict for almost any reason. Even if you are able to get an eviction through, you're going to have to go through the notoriously slow and bureaucratic process up there in New York State. And, you know, it's going to make it very, very difficult for landlords, okay? So they always question, and I've mentioned this before, why do they think, like they're always saying, oh, well, there's all these illegal evictions going on up here in places like New York, right? And I always ask, why do you think there's so many illegal evictions? Why do you think a landlord would go through, this illegal process to evict a tenant? Because you make it so hard to evict, so hard to make any sort of money, that there's no hope for the landlord going through the legal process in a lot of cases, or at least they feel there's no hope. And then they do this illegal eviction instead because they think that's their only way out. And I don't think it's a good thing that landlords are put into that sort of situation. But let's get into this article and see what it says. An Airbnb user who never intends to leave. Tenants not paying enough rent to keep up buildings. A roommate temporarily renting a room who later decides not to move out. Under the legislators' misleadingly named Good Cause Eviction Bill, these occupants can all remain in their apartments forever, and the property owner has virtually no recourse. No eviction ever would be a better name for an absurdly vague, sweeping proposal that would place strict new limits on rent increases and evictions for nearly 1.6 million New York renters. Yeah, I like that proposed name. No eviction ever. Let's get it out there that this proposal is basically stripping landlords of their property rights, okay? And, making this unconstitutional taking of property by the government, in my opinion, okay? Now, I don't know if the Supreme Court would agree with me or not, but to me it seems pretty basic. If a landlord can't take their property back, what's the point of even writing a lease? Okay, well, here's a 1-year lease. Well, you can't get rid of them after a year. So what's the point of even writing a lease? It's pointless. While some revisions are likely, the business community and real estate industry nonetheless fear it'll become law with its devastating core elements intact. The bill broadly defines nearly anyone who pays another person to occupy real estate in New York as a tenant, and expressly prevents landlords from removing them except in the narrowest circumstances. Aimed at imposing draconian restrictions on free market apartments, the measure would create automatic lease renewal rights even when tenants behave badly or landlords want to reclaim units for personal uses or to fix and sell buildings. Okay, so yeah, we have, for example, tenants behaving badly, right? Imagine you have a tenant in your unit who is disturbing the other tenants by playing their music loud all the time. Okay, that's expressly not written. It says in your lease, hey, you can't be disturbing the other tenants, but hey, you can't evict this person because it's not one of the little narrow number of evictions or reasons that you can evict under this law. Okay, and another thing, hey, you want to move into the property yourself. You own, let's say, a duplex, right? And you want to move into one of the units in the duplex yourself. And you can't do that. You can't evict this tenant. This tenant has a right to live there. You have to keep that tenant in there for as long as that tenant wants to stay, no matter what. Okay, you can never, ever move in there if that tenant wants to stay. That's what this law is saying. That's how ridiculous this law is. Imagine you just want to get out of the business, okay? You're just like, hey, I own this single family house over here, right? I got a tenant in there and I want to retire. I want to go move to Belize and enjoy my life on the beach, right? I got to sell this place. Nobody wants to buy the property with a tenant in there. They want to buy the property so they can move into it themselves, right? But your tenant is like, nope. I have a right to stay here forever. I can never be removed. Well, this is the reason why this good cause eviction law is a complete farce. It's a complete joke. And that's why, I completely agree with the person who wrote this article that, we can't have it. We just cannot have this. Okay. The tenant shouldn't have more property rights than the person who owns the property. Period. Okay. In theory, the bill lets landlords evict tenants for good causes, such as failing to pay rent, damaging apartments, or using them for illegal purposes. But no eviction ever would turn even the simplest instances of non-payment and lease violations into expensive, time-consuming court cases by setting the eviction bar impossibly high. Consider rent increases. According to the bill, increases above 3% or 1.5 times the regional consumer price index, whichever is higher, are presumed to be unreasonable and not permitted. Worse, the bill leaves it to the court's discretion to rule that any rent increase, even below 3% or 1.5 times CPI, is unreasonable. So yeah, the court can decide that, hey, a 2% increase is unreasonable. It all depends on the judge that you go see in eviction court, okay? So landlords wouldn't be able to raise their rents more than 3%. And that's in the best case scenario. And if you even tried, you just couldn't do it. So basically, it imposes this rent control onto everyone. This is how crazy this law is. I mean, the fact that they even are trying to write a rent control element into it tells you that this is not just an eviction bill. This is, just a straight taking of our properties away from us, okay? That means tenants could challenge all rent hikes, even those for trivial amounts or those desperately needed for maintenance. The bill, which assumes tenants never support evictions of bad neighbors, amounts to a particularly damaging type of universal rent control in which tenants' rents would be essentially frozen in place. Property owners would end up subsidizing all tenants, even those in luxury apartments who could easily afford increases. Landlords would defer or skip repairs and upgrades to avoid the court battles necessary to fund them. This would harm everyone involved, reducing the quality of New York's housing stock. Yeah, and that's exactly what would happen, okay? We've seen it before, and I've read the articles before about these people wondering why their rent control units are in such bad shape. That's because there's zero incentive whatsoever for the landlord to make improvements or do the repairs. And, that's exactly what will happen. If the landlord is unable to make any money, then they can't do the upgrades, they can't do the repairs, they can't do the capital expenditures like they're supposed to. And it could even lead to it being dangerous living conditions like that awful fire that happened up in the Bronx. But I'm going to keep talking about this good cause eviction thing. I'm not going to stop, okay? It's bad news for landlords, and I don't want to see it. I want to see this fail, and I think landlords up in New York should be fighting it as hard as they can right now.